Deranged Jack Smith, doesn't he look deranged? You see the picture with the purple robe? He's a deranged human being. We're getting stronger by the day. Somebody said, you should treat him nicer. Maybe he'd be nice. Let me tell you, this guy is a lost soul, bad guy.
Former President Donald Trump spent the weekend testing the limits of the judge assigned to the case. During Thursday's arraignment, the magistrate judge warned Trump against interfering in the case, telling him that his bond could be revoked if he tried to influence a juror, threaten or bribe a witness, or retaliate against anyone giving information to prosecutors. Despite telling the judge that he understood her warning, just one day later, the former president posted on his social media site, quote, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." That message set off alarm bells within the Justice Department, where special counsel Jack Smith quickly asked a judge to impose a protective order in the case to block Trump from sharing evidence turned over to his defense team on social media. In response, Judge Tanya Chutkan gave Trump's legal team until 5 o'clock this afternoon to respond to the DOJ's request. The former president's lawyers asked for a 3-day extension, which the judge denied. Meanwhile, Trump continued to go after those involved in the case over the weekend, despite being warned not to do so. His targets included former Vice President Mike Pence, who is a potential witness for prosecutors. Also, the judge herself, and Jack Smith, both on social media and during a speech in Alabama.
Deranged Jack Smith, doesn't he look deranged? You see the picture with the purple robe? He's a deranged human being. We're getting stronger by the day. Somebody said, you should treat him nicer. Maybe he'd be nice. Let me tell you, this guy is a lost soul, bad guy.
Let's bring in former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance and NBC News senior executive editor for national security, David Rode. Good to have you both on this morning.
So, Joyce, you and I have talked about this before. You practiced law in Alabama. I practiced law in L.A., Lower Alabama. I just keep going back to this. A federal judge, at least in Lower Alabama, Northwest Florida, would not put up with any of this.
If this were anybody else.
Any of this. And I'm just wondering, and I asked this of Chuck Rosenberg earlier, we talk about equal justice under the law, and yes, he's been indicted for stealing nuclear secrets, and yes, he's been indicted for trying to overthrow a presidential election. That said, what defendant in any federal court in America would be able to threaten a prosecutor, intimidate witnesses, and get away with it and not have their bail revoked?
I think your point is very well taken. And imagine if this defendant was someone who was accused of foreign terrorism, or if this was someone who was involved in a violent drug trafficking ring. Certainly, this would have met with swift condemnation from the court, likely a revocation of bond. But the reality that this judge and this prosecutor are up against is that the goal here is to get the case to trial. And I think they will try to avoid as much as possible, at least unless Trump makes it absolutely impossible, these sorts of comments, because he cannot carry them out. The risk here is that he can ignite his followers. We've seen him send a lone wolf down a dangerous path in the past. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Judge Chutkan bring Trump into court this week, admonish him again, remind him that there are consequences. The problem that the court will face will be you can't continue to threaten. At some point, you have to actually be willing to hold him accountable.
I was just going to say, Joyce, at what point? At what point do the threats stop and the action begins? Because if Donald Trump can threaten federal prosecutors, if he can intimidate witnesses, you know where I'm going, every criminal defendant in America can do that and point to the example of Donald Trump saying, well, wait a second, he threatened a federal prosecutor and nothing happened to him. Wait a second, he intimidated potential witnesses and nothing happened to him. can't happen to me. That's not equal justice under the law.
Eamon, there's been a lot of debate this week over how much or how little Donald Trump may love his adult sons, Don Jr. and Eric. But those two boys loudly came to their father's defense this week after his indictment by Jack Smith on Tuesday, with Eric Trump saying this on, where else, Fox.
We're no better than some of these third world countries around the world. You know, we are literally trying to imprison political opponents. We're better than this.
Eamon, these people have no shame. So it's time for some receipts. No memory, no shame, no facts. Time for some receipts. Here is Eric Trump leading a rally in October of 2019.
You lock her up goes to lock him up. I don't know. It might lock him up. I don't know. I like lock her up a little bit more, but thank you. That's a good idea. I like that idea.
We are better than this, says the guy who led a literal rally chanting, lock her up and lock him up. I mean, words like hypocritical and shameless, Eamon, don't do justice to what we just saw. And they're either dumb enough or dishonest enough to just keep doing it, to just keep pretending that it's the Democrats who are targeting their political opponents with prison and not them. And the funny thing is, I don't think Donald Trump's going to give Eric any more love just because Eric humiliates himself in this way on his dad's behalf. Do you?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is no. I mean, and listen, and speaking of political opponents, I don't know if you saw this tweet from Donnie Jr., who was trying to one-up the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who was calling out the Trump-allied, anti-democratic Russian President Vladimir Putin for actually jailing his main opposition figure, Alexei Navalny. And what does Donnie Jr. do? He thought this was a good time to gaslight us all by making it appear that his father was the pro-democracy figure in this comparison. I mean, that is the epitome of shameless. By the way, this was also the same Donnie Jr. who, to your point, tweeted out, lock her up, about, wait for it, his dad's main political opposition figure at the time, who was Hillary Clinton. I mean, you literally cannot make this stuff up.
No.
And here's the thing, and to your point about the love, I mean, you can almost explain his children's willingness to embarrass themselves for their father's love, among perhaps other incentives. But how do you explain Fox's hosts like Jesse Waters debasing himself like this? Watch.
It was aghast at sarcastic lock her up chants, remember? But last night appeared sexually aroused at the thought of Donald Trump imprisoned.
Oh, really? The lock her up chants that were all throughout the 2016 were suddenly sarcastic? I mean, Donald Trump has done more, Mehdi, to weaponize the Department of Justice in his favor, from firing Jeff Sessions, his attorney general, to trying to use the DOJ, as we just learned this week, in his coup attempt. And now Jesse Waters wants us to think, oh, he was just being sarcastic at all those rallies.
I mean, Donald Trump, when he does sarcastic, you know sarcasm, and he wasn't sarcastic on the debate stage in 2016 when he pointed at Hillary and said, I'm going to appoint a special prosecutor. If I'm president, you're going to be in jail. We know that he spent his presidency, as you say, pressuring the DOJ, the FBI, to investigate Clinton. Eamon, our time's up tonight. I'm just going to say, off the top of my head, just off the top of my head, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Eric Holder, Andrew McCabe, Jim Comey, Robert Mueller. How many people has Donald Trump said openly he wants locked up over the years?
Listen, it's always projection with the Republican or Trump allies, I should say. You know, when they are talking about what they are accusing Democrats of doing, it's what they internalize and what they have been doing for the last couple of years. What can we say, man? We're going to have to wait and see how this all plays out. Mehdi, great to see you as always, my friend. Enjoy the rest of your evening off, and good evening to you tonight on Eamon. Deranged. That is how one high-profile Democrat describes the Trump legal defense strategy in the election interference case.